Robert Clifton Weaver, born in Washington, D.C., 1907. His parents and his teachers at the elite Dunbar High School, which boasted a host of distinguished black alumni including Charles Houston and William Hayes, instilled in him pride in being a black American. After Dunbar, Weaver went to Harvard, where he earned his undergraduate degree in 1925 and a Ph.D. Robert Clifton Weaver, born in Washington, D.C., 1907. His parents and his teachers at the elite Dunbar High School, which boasted a host of distinguished black alumni including Charles Houston and William Hayes, instilled in him pride in being a black American. After Dunbar, Weaver went to Harvard, where he earned his undergraduate degree in 1925 and a Ph.D. in economics in 1933, despite the hostility of professors who doubted that black people could do serious intellectual work. Such racist thinking only hardened Weaver's resolve to succeed. Robert C. Weaver was a noted economist and administrator. From 1966 through 1968, he was the first African-American cabinet official, served as the Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. Weaver was born and raised in Washington, D.C. from 1929 through 1934. He attended Harvard University, earning economic degrees at the Bachelor of Science, Master's, and Ph.D. levels. As an administrator, Weaver worked as an advisor to the Secretary of the Interior 1933 through 1937, Special Assistant from the Housing Authority 1937 through 1940, and an administrative assistant with the National Defense Advisory Commission 1940. During the Second World War, he worked in several capacities concerned with mobilizing black labor into industrial employment contracted by the federal government. In the immediate post-war period, Weaver held several successive positions with the federal government. His most noted positions were serving as the Department of the Interior's first black advisor on racial problems and Chicago's executive director of the Mayor's Committee on Race Relations. Simultaneously, Weaver taught at several universities, wrote 2 books, and directed the fellowship department at the John Hay Whitney Foundation from 1949 to 1955. Thereafter, he became a member of New York State's governor's cabinet as its rent commissioners 1955 to 1959. Before re-entering with Washington's Beltway politics, Weaver served as the chairman of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. In 1961, he was appointed by President John F. Kennedy to the post of Administrator of the Housing and Home Finance Agency. In 1966, President Lyndon B. Johnson appointed Weaver as the first Secretary of HUD. In 1969, he left the public life in federal government to preside over Bernard M. Burrich College, 1969 to 1970, and to teach urban affairs at Hunter College, 1970 to 1978. Robert C. Weaver's books include Negro Labor, A National Problem, 1946, The Negro Ghetto, 1948, The Urban Complex, Human Values in Urban Life, 1964, and Dilemmas of Urban America, 1965. Weaver dedicated most of his life to fighting discrimination and improved race relations. He held a succession of assignments for a variety of departments under the New Deal administration of the 1930s and 1940s, frequently serving as advisor for minority affairs and race relations. He advised the Secretary of Interior Harold L. Eikens from 1934 to 1938, acted as special assistant to Nathan Strauss of the Housing Authority from 1938 to 1940. Assisted Sidney Hillman of the National Defense Advisory Commission in 1940, and was chief of the Negro Employment and Training Branch of the Labor Division in the Office of Production Management from 1942 to 1943. After the United States joined World War II, he served as the War Manpower Commission as Director of Negro Manpower Services. Throughout his life, Weaver felt the sting of discrimination personally. Shortly after he finished his work at Harvard, he was recommended for a position with the Federal Reserve Board in New York City. He did not get the job because of his race. Years later, when he became Housing and Home Finance Administrator, he had a problem with his own housing after he and his wife moved into an apartment building on Connecticut Avenue in Washington, D.C. Both suffered cold shoulders from the tenants. Weaver left Washington in the 1940s because he felt that the anti-discriminatory programs he had helped to put in place were moving too slowly. He served on the first mayor's race relations board in Chicago 1944 to 1945 and then moved to New York, where he taught at Columbia University in New York University. From 1949 to 1954, he worked with the John Hay Whitney Foundation as Director of Opportunity Fellowships, distributing money to fund projects that would not otherwise have received support. He distributed at least $600,000 to promising young African American scholars. During the 1950s, he served on various housing boards for the city and state of New York. Armed with impressive credentials but bleak job prospects, Weaver returned to Washington, where together with his Harvard classmate John P. Davis, he founded the Negro Industrial League (NIL) and the Joint Committee on Economic Recovery (JCER) to advocate for black workers. They attracted sponsorships from 24 black and white organizations, including the National Baptist Convention, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the NAACP, the United Mine Workers, the Elks, the Catholic Interracial Council, and the YWCA. Weaver could soon claim that the NIL and the JCER represented over 1 million black people. This broad coalition demanded that the Roosevelt administration appointed black advisors or experts to key new ideal agencies. In 1935, Weaver succeeded a white Southern as the advisor on Negro affairs in the Department of Interior, and together with Mary McLeod Bethune became co-leader of Roosevelt's black cabinet. Weaver remained in government since service until 1944 as director of the Office of Race Relations at the United States Housing Authority. He established guidelines that ensured that black workers would be employed on all government-funded housing projects. Under President John F. Kennedy, Weaver rejoined the government in 1961 and persuaded Kennedy to issue an executive order banning racial discrimination on federal housing programs. In 1966, under Kennedy's successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, Weaver became Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, the nation's first African-American cabinet secretary. He spearheaded the passage of the Housing Act of 1968, which expanded opportunities for black homeowners. Weaver died in New York City in 1997. Robert C. Weaver Federal Building Headquarters of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development (HUD) in Washington, D.C. stands out as one of the most successful modern-era buildings in GSA's inventory. In 1999, the HUD building was officially named to honor Dr. Robert C. Weaver for his service as the first African-American cabinet member. Serving as HUD Secretary from 1966 to 1968 under President Lyndon B. Johnson, Weaver, a native of Washington, is credited not only with setting the precedent for African Americans at the highest level of the government, but also for occupying policy-making positions that benefited all Americans.